This is Pete Moore on Halo Talks NYC. I have the pleasure of having a friend of mine for a long time, Michael Leonardi. He has started up several businesses, serial entrepreneur, avid health and fitness enthusiast, and he's always got good ideas and always on the power tip of what's about to happen. So we're going to use this as a lens into the future, but also talk about his past and how he's gotten to where he is. So, Michael, welcome to Halo Talks.
Pete, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Great. So we met probably 7 or 8 years ago. You were working on the red cord, and you're working in the medical fitness side of the business. So why don't you give everybody your quick background and what you learned over time, and then we'll do a little Q&A together. That'll bring us to Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, absolutely.
Road to Jiu-Jitsu, we're going to call this.
I actually started out I went to school and started out my professional career in film and television. And I worked at World Wrestling Entertainment for about 5 years doing video production and on-air promotions, branding, image campaigns. Absolutely loved it. But man, I had this little entrepreneurial bug in me. And my wife is in rehab. She's a speech language pathologist, and we saw a huge market opportunity. And I just, for whatever reason, I'm like, man, I think I want to go in this direction. So I left WWE, and we started a rehab staffing business. Mm-hmm. And it was doing very, very well. And the first issue I ran into, and as a serial entrepreneur, Pete, I'm sure you know, you make a million mistakes, you learn a lot, and you get better over time. And so That was my first lesson in cash flow and accounts receivable. So working with hospitals and rehab hospitals, subacute facilities, they don't like paying you for 90 to 120 days. So as a startup and a small entrepreneur, that became an issue that I had to deal with. Ended up selling that business though in 2007. And around that time, just through chance, I was introduced to a friend whose father was a very well-known exercise physiologist out of UMass. And he was approached by the guys at Red Cord, which is a Norwegian group. And they were looking to penetrate the US market. It was suspension exercise before anybody knew what suspension exercise was. Just newsflash, TRX didn't invent it. People don't realize that. They invented the concept here in the US and did an amazing job. But sling exercise, suspension exercise, whatever you want to call it, been around for a really long time. And these guys were looking to get into the US. I brought a friend of ours who was a physical therapist and my brother. We went to go check it out. And we were blown away. He was blown away from some of the clinical outcomes that you can get with the system pretty quickly. So one way or another, we decided to get involved and eventually took over the full North American license and distributorship for it.
And the interesting part about Red Cord is you're really going into the medical side, and you're going into, more of the pain management, not necessarily like straight into the fitness or traditional health club industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And really that's where their value lied at the time. Around then, 2007, TRX was definitely coming into the fitness. It was a very simple, nice, awesome modality and tool. Red Cord had a lot of other, as you remember, had a lot of other pieces and components, and it was definitely more of a medical intervention. And they use a technique called NEURAC, which is short for neuromuscular activation. So it really dove into pain and understanding the mechanisms of pain and how it shuts down or slows down or inhibits the signal flow to some of the muscles. Or I would say like a light switch, like it dimmed a lot of those afferent signals to the muscles. And how to kind of reactivate those and relieve some of those musculoskeletal ailments. It's really cool.
So how hard was it when you got into the industry, just so entrepreneurs understand, how long it takes to kind of educate a market on the benefits? Like what one is obviously patience. I was just doing a podcast and we were talking about like how long a sales cycle is. Like, I can totally understand that. And I used to run a software company. I was trying to convince people, you're going to get your leads from the internet and you should buy a DSL line. Yeah. It'd be a worthwhile, cost. So, how did that experience with Red Cord, where you're basically an evangelist, you're going into the medical industry, which is kind of, notoriously been slow to embrace new technologies.
Yeah.
So how did you kind of power through that? Obviously you got working capital issues, you got sales cycle issues, you got, how is this different from or better than a TRX? Without getting too deep and us going into like a, entrepreneurial therapy lesson, which we could probably provide many people. How did that experience go, and what'd you learn from that and take away from, what you're using now?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Number one of the things that we really, I think looking back, we really should have just focused solely on medical. We spent some time, we wanted to get into the fitness as well. And we had a little bit of traction in the Pilates side of things for sure. But, it was just, to be quite honest, it was a lot of grinding. It was getting in front of people, doing demos, getting that word of mouth, going to all the shows, the national shows. And the way we saw growth in the market was simply you plant a seed in New York or Los Angeles, you get those first movers on board, and they started to talk about it. Then their colleagues or other people started to see it, started to do demos, started to do, continuing ed. That was another thing too. We had to make sure we got our classes approved as continuing ed. And you're 100% correct on the rehab market. It's a slow growth type of thing over time. But the cool thing is it's sticky. Once you're there, you're there. Once you get in and you work through that sales cycle, like for instance, we were looking to get into some big hospitals like Health South. Man, it took me 6 years before we actually got into a facility there. So it was difficult with cash flow. It was difficult. It was just a slow grinding process. But we believed in the product.
Yeah, talk a little bit about, for so many entrepreneurs that listen to these podcasts here, about the benefits of turning some technology or some program into a continuing education credit, and how that kind of gets you programmed into, or easing your way into the professionals actually taking on, those certifications.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like live or die. Like if you don't, if you have a tool, and most of the time there is some education around that. If you're not getting that certified as continuing education, now in rehab it was state by state, and then they've over time they have condensed it where you can get one and it's approved in multiple states. But if you did not have that, I honestly thought you'd have almost zero shot, because the medical profession wants to see research out there. They want to know that this thing is somewhat evidence-based, and you do have to go through that process with getting a course approved for continuing it. So it was like absolutely critical. If you don't have a plan of getting your stuff certified as Con Ed, it's a really hard uphill climb.
So once you got it into the contingent education credits, where do you go from there? Did you end up going and marketing it to people that had a personal training certification, nutritionist? Like, what was your path to getting more and more people on the platform?
Yeah, it was definitely going after physical therapists, and it was, we would go after both outpatient rehab facilities, so mom and pop outpatient rehab facilities, and that sales cycle was a little bit quicker because you were with the decision maker. But we also looked into getting to big hospital chains. That sales cycle was longer. Obviously, that Con Ed was super important. So we did digital marketing. We did some content marketing out there. I mean, that was definitely a part of it as well. Getting it into regional providers, and really just pushing first and foremost that education. That was probably the biggest, most important thing.
Gotcha. So talk about the transition you made into jiu-jitsu, and what your passion was there, and where you think that modality goes, not just from a physical, fitness standpoint, but also from a mental health and creating community and having people, get the self-confidence that they need.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started, so for my time at WWE, real quick story, I worked with Brock Lesnar, who's like was a big star.
Sure.
And he made a transition to MMA. And I was watching a little bit at this time. This was like late 2000s, like 2008 or so. And, I was probably about 30 years old at the time, 30, 31, something like that. And really got into it and saw jiu-jitsu a little bit more. And there was a couple of guys on there who were local to me that were on the card. And I was just looking for something. I was in my mid-30s. I played sports as a kid. I was like looking for something. Just going to the gym to me, and I think for a lot of people sometimes gets boring. We want to look for new things, which I think is what we see in the market. We see a lot of different concepts and new concepts out there. So anyway, started training. I actually didn't end up really signing up until 2011. And it blew me away in terms of the boxes that it checked off of stress relief, community, life lessons, and working out. And I just started to feel a heck of a lot better. I was able to manage stress a little bit better. And I started my journey as a practitioner at that point in time. It wasn't until about 7 years later, when I decided to step out of the day-to-day with Red Cord and Active Cord, which is another business that was kind of related to Active Cord, where I said, man, I see a huge opportunity here for the market to continue to build and spread Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because it's growing. And I think, like I said, it's checking off a lot of those things from mental health, from physical health. And so I dove in.
So you own the franchise in Princeton at this point? Yeah.
So we have 2 locations now, basically one just south of Princeton and one just north of Princeton in central Jersey.
And what's the member base? Kids, adults? How's it mixed?
Yeah, it's unlike I think previous martial arts or a karate or taekwondo, those are primarily mostly kids. You do have some adults. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because of the popularity of MMA, we have a pretty healthy mixture of kids and adults. It's not 50-50 quite there, but it's close to 50, and it moves up and down a little bit. So you got a good, good mixture of kids and adults.
And are you actually teaching the classes now as well?
So I teach a couple classes. I really spend a lot of time on the back end of things in terms of just tweaking operations, sales and marketing, and retention strategies, everything, just working on the back end of the business. I took a position day to day as like our program director, which is pretty much the front desk and does the sales and a couple other things, just to really, really understand the ins and outs of the market. And now I'm starting to step out of that and work more on the business instead of in the business. So
got it. And what are you seeing from a standpoint of what people are looking to get out of the workouts? Where I'd say more traditionally it was either from a self-defense standpoint, maybe confidence booster. I'd say those are probably, when we were growing up, those are probably like the 2 main reasons why you went to either karate or some type of jiu-jitsu class. So how have you seen that evolve and really using that in your marketing of it, of like, here's what you should expect to achieve?
Yeah. People do come to us for different reasons. They'll check off self-defense. They'll check off stress relief. Sometimes they just don't know. They're looking for something different, and they think it looks cool. But what I've seen is people stick around for some of those things I just mentioned. The community is super strong. I mean, from a culture standpoint, being in the industry for quite some time, I'm pretty blown away about how strong and how sticky it is and how long people stay around with this brand or jiu-jitsu because of the community it builds. Certainly the stress release is something that is major, and a lot of those life lessons and things of that nature.
Gotcha. So how often do you have people come? The average member, how many days a week do they show up? And are they supplementing their workouts? What do you kind of see when someone gets into jiu-jitsu? And do you see this evolving into a modality that's going to be inside of health clubs? Or do you see it as kind of standalone retail? It's been traditionally.
Yeah, so I think most people try and get in there 2 to 3 times a week. I think it's something that definitely should be supplemented. Like I still go to the gym. I still go for instance, for me, still go for strength training. I think it's good to supplement this with some kind of yoga or some mobility and flexibility work for sure, and some strength training. So I see this as very synergistic with still going to the gym. I do, obviously you can see from, like, for instance, the UFC gym, they have mixed together that traditional gym with weights and treadmills, but also adding those, MMA classes to it. I think is what you're going to continue to see. And then I think what interests me a lot is, and this is something I actually started a nonprofit with one of my students last year, is really starting to get more and more explicit with mental health and helping people. At the end of the day, what I found when we started researching this, not to go off for a minute, is that people are happiest in life. They're most fulfilled by their connections and the quality of those connections. So what we kind of found is we've got to help people build very strong and healthy relationships with others. So that means breaking into self-awareness, understanding who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, finding humility, finding authenticity, self-management, being able to manage that stress, understanding grit and emotional balance, social awareness, understanding empathy and compassion and diversity around you. And that's a really, really good thing. And then social management, learning to work with others, learning to deal with issues constructively. And so we just found, and this is all, I didn't make this up, we researched and kind of put together a lot of this social emotional learning stuff that they're teaching in school to kids now. Man, I think adults need this just as much, if not more, than kids, So it's like, I think, again, the whole hybrid model I'm seeing a lot, obviously, in small group training. People are starting to move there for various reasons. So I think once you have that, you can also start to develop some components where mental health is addressed a little bit more explicitly. And I see a big opportunity there in the market as time goes on, and we get a little bit further away from putting a stigma on mental health, and it becoming a quote unquote cool, trendy thing to work on.
So do you try and do anything outside of the four walls of the location? Do you go into employers and do trainings? Do you go to schools? Does this resonate, or are you are you kind of a pioneer in, explaining the narrative?
Yeah, it's 100%. This year we just started working with schools doing after school programs. It's a huge lead generator for sure, and it's a great revenue stream to do after school programs. I 100% plan on going to corporations. I just don't think we're there yet. Personally, with our school, just like operations and being able to execute on that.
Right.
So right now, a lot of the stuff that we're expanding out is looking at summer camps, doing after school programs in conjunction with some of the school districts. And also one of the things that we love to do is women's self-defense. That's a really big thing right now, doing free women's self-defense seminars. In fact, we just started a recurring every Sunday free women's self-defense seminar, just so, because the reality is we go out there and we teach a class, we get a lot of people come, but one class, like they're not gonna learn much from that. They're gonna do it, but these things take repetition.
Right.
So definitely doing stuff beyond the four walls, I think, is super important for the growth and longevity of the business and getting into the community.
Gotcha. And then what are you looking to do going forward here? You looking to roll out more locations, take over more territory? What's your personal plan over the next, call it 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, 100%. I think there's so much more room for jiu-jitsu to grow. Martial arts is something that's been around for a very, very, very long time. And the way that I see it is that Brazilian jiu-jitsu is just becoming more and more popular within the martial arts industry. Martial arts industry is still growing, a couple percentage points per year. But I think within that, you see Brazilian jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts taking more of that pie. And so what really interested me in Gracie Barra is it's a 33-year-old brand. It's been around since 1986. It's the Gracies. I mean, they've been along much, much longer than that. But Gracie Barra, I think, is the first that has really institutionalized Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and created a good branding, good infrastructure, everything else like that's a great platform for growth. And so definitely just looking at the East Coast and the Northeast as just going to continue to expand organically in this area for sure.
Good. Are you going to do that freestanding, or are you going to look to do it in host locations?
No, right now I think freestanding is something. I think working with host locations, I think, is one of those outside of the four wall strategies that we could provide value, get our brand out there, maybe generate some revenue, but ultimately still have our brick and mortar setters that we drive people to.
What do you think it is why, dance studios and martial arts related concepts seem to never close? I mean, you go back to where you grew up and like the same dance studios there and the same martial arts, but you see everything else is basically turned over except for those two concepts for some reason.
Yeah, I think it still boils down to connection. I think it boils down to a place where a place where people are actually really learning things. They're not just going there for a workout. They're not just going for aesthetics. They're going there because they have a passion for it. They're there meeting other people. They're checking off those boxes of, at least in martial arts, stress relief. It's an art. Dance is an art. Martial arts, it's an art, right? At the end of the day, martial art. And so I think that's what makes them so sticky compared to in fitness. People like working out, and a lot of the times you see that when people do stay at a small group training location or whatever it is, a lot of times it's because of the people. It's because of the instructor. It's because of their that's why they're staying. I think a lot of the time. So I see in the fitness industry, I kind of get scared a little bit of not why I haven't dove into fitness concepts as much, is because they turn over a lot. People get bored, and so that's a little scary as an entrepreneur. Whereas, like you said, martial arts or dance studios, they're really long term. And it's because they have those other components to it that keep people around for a really long time and keep them invested.
Gotcha. So, what are some of the things that people around you hear you say often, or you got any quotes that you live by, or that's a Leonardi ism?
Oh, gosh. There's a lot. I mean, especially with jiu-jitsu, like you're learning a lot about just life lessons. The one that I've been really high on lately is emotion is contagious. And it's just, I'm kind of really discovering how contagious it really is. And I think when it comes to building culture within an organization, how that person, you walk into a room and right away, you've done this. You walk into a room where somebody walks into the room and they're like, they got a long face. They're miserable. It just sucks the life out of you, whereas vice versa, you have somebody come in that's like beaming with energy and positive and happy to see you and everything else. Like, man, that just lifts you up. And so I see that day to day. And I see it from, just in dealing with so many students and our staff. And that's like, to me right now, like emotion is contagious. It's like a huge core to building that great culture and atmosphere is making sure that when we come into the school or when anybody comes in, any practitioner, if it's a fitness instructor, if it's a physical therapist, if it's a martial arts instructor, you got to deal with self-awareness first. You got to deal with yourself. If you're feeling good inside and you're positive, man, that's going to affect so many other people. It's going to affect also your performance and everything else. So it's a big thing going on right now.
So, and you've also done this with your brothers, your co-partner in this?
Yeah. So my brother was in pharmaceuticals, healthcare for a pretty long time, and then exited, about 3 years ago. And he was actually one of the guys originally that came with me to see Red Cord. And we'd always talked about doing something with Red Cord. And how that evolved real quickly is we'd go to mom and pop outpatient rehab facilities selling this Red Cord modality in the NURAC. And they'd say, man, this is really cool. We love it. But hey, I only have 15 minutes to work with a patient because I'm an in-network provider and that's all I get reimbursed because the reimbursements have dropped dramatically since the 90s. And so like, this is cool, but I can't really use it as effectively. So we were starting to think, man, like, how do we handle this? And we realized that in order for that to be really effective and get great results, you need to be one-on-one with that patient for an hour, or a good chunk of time. And in-network it's just not cutting it anymore.
Right.
That's just the reality. So we're like, man, so a lot of people were turning us down for that. So we said, you know what? We're just going to go out there and open our own clinics and have that be our differentiator. And, so we started to open out-of-network physical therapy clinics. And this was a while ago, and it's gotten more popular now because people have had to. You either go out of network or you get acquired by a hospital network or a hospital-based system because you're just getting crushed. And so, so Active Core is separate from Red Cord. We use Red Cord in the clinics, but Active Core is our physical therapy brand, and we're cash-based now. I mean, people pay upfront in full for our services, and it's thriving now, especially as the market is changing. So
that's great. That's great. So, we've been friends for a long time. So congrats on the progress and success, and making a lot of people healthier and happier and more flexible. And now taking this over to the jiu-jitsu side. So hopefully we can be helpful to you and spread the word. Yeah. And look forward to seeing you in person here and doing get a jiu-jitsu class in for my crew.
Yeah, absolutely.
See how we hold up.
And it's funny, people don't realize how capable they are until they do it. And that's a huge thing about martial arts, as is that self-confidence. Like you're way stronger than you realize, which I get to witness on a daily basis with our students. But Pete, thanks
great.
again. Yeah, this has been awesome, and it's great catching up with you and seeing all the stuff you're doing. I love listening to your podcast and stuff off of LinkedIn. It's really cool stuff. And thanks again for having me on.
Appreciate it. All right. Emotion is contagious. We're going to leave with that. So spread the Leonardis around and let's change this industry and get rid of all these sugar companies and pharmaceutical companies getting in our way.
Exactly.
All right, man. Good to hear from you again. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Pete. Take care.
All right, buddy. Great.